My guest today is Mike Spadier. Mike is the CMO for Still Austin, which is a whiskey company here in Central Texas. I got to know Mike prior to 2020 as a client. He was the Chief Marketing Officer of Onnit Labs here in Austin, but then I really got to know him during the COVID era. We had started a campfire group together with some mutual friends where we got together every Thursday and spent several hours every Thursday just talking about life, talking about what was going on in the world, talking about families, and we were all growing businesses at the time, and we had a lot of shared experience. And not to overstate it, but I feel like the friendship there with Mike and with some of the other guys in that group was what really got me through that 2020 and 2021 year. So in this conversation, as we always do, we cover a lot of ground. We talk about Mike's professional trajectory from his time in California to coming to Austin to take the CMO job at Onnit, to starting his own agency, which was called Heart of the Sun, to then selling that agency and going to work for Still Austin full time. We talk a lot about sort of the entanglement of working professionally and then coming home and having to be dad and husband, and where those two things work well together with his wife and where they're sometimes at odds. I could spend hours and hours talking to Mike. We limited this conversation to just a little bit over an hour, but I expect this is not the last time we'll talk. So with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this very wide-ranging conversation with Mike Spadier. Thanks for being willing to do this, man. I've told you before, if this is something I'm going to continue doing, it feels like every rep I get is an important one, because I learn just little nuances of it and I figure where the pitfalls are and try to avoid them the next time. And I'm still such in my infancy as a podcaster that any rep helps, and any rep where I'm talking to somebody that I'm actually comfortable with, where it's not like interviewing somebody from scratch.
Yeah.
It's an easier rep to take.
Cool.
Although I am interested to get some people in here that I've never met before and to see what that's like.
That'd be fun.
Getting to know somebody from scratch on camera is...
I find that in, the interviews that I've done in the past to be kind of some of my favorite sit-down interviews, for sure.
Going from scratch?
Yeah, because you kind of have to go through a lot of the formalities, and you have to do a little more research, and you have to get a little more prepared, I would say. One of the tricks of that is if someone's done it a bunch of times, that they've answered the same 17 questions over and over and over and over again. And most of that stuff's out there living somewhere. So then it's, there's a challenge to get to something else that they haven't talked about before. And if you do, it starts to get really fun.
Ask the question they've never been asked before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Assuming you've answered this before, let's dig in on that.
Yeah. There's also a little bit of laziness associated with this kind of a podcast.
For sure.
Because it requires no preparation.
Are we rolling? We're good to go?
I think so.
Okay.
I prepared on the way by just thinking through, what's the stuff that I'd want to talk to Mike about that I feel like would actually benefit him in a way and still be a productive conversation.
Sure.
So we'll try to stay in those lanes.
Hit the list. Let's do this.
Have you always been a marketer?
Professionally?
Yeah. Have you ever done anything outside of marketing?
Let's see. I was a child actor.
You were a child actor?
I was. I had my Screen Actors Guild card.
Really?
Yep.
Do you still get royalties?
No.
Nothing?
No. I did a bunch of commercials and a bunch of print work from when I was 5 years old till 11, probably. And then part-time gigs after that. I was a host at Marie Callender's. I was a scorekeeper at Wayne Gretzky's Roller Hockey Center. Also worked the snack booth. And then I got my job at Active Ride Shop, which was the skateboard, snowboard shop in California. And I worked there from 16 to 19, and then I got hired at Active to go to the office to run digital marketing. So while I was in college, I started working as a marketer, which was I just knew how to do computer stuff. So they were like, hey, computer stuff guy, we have a website. And so then computer stuff just equaled marketing, and then that was it.
Do you have a degree?
No.
Do you have any college ed at all?
Yeah, I quit college because I had that gig. So I was So I should say I did a little bit of like freelancing for graphic design, website building, stuff like that from, I don't know, 16 years old on. And so when I was going to school, I went to Cal State Fullerton for like 2 years, and I was still in my undergrad, and I was getting paid to do like a professional job, and had a legit professional career path. And there was no kind of digital marketing schooling or any kind of programming or anything like that because it was so new. And I was driving from my house in Covina at the time, which was like 20 miles east of LA. I was driving from there to Fullerton, which was, 30 miles south, to work, which was another 30 miles the opposite way. And so I was just making this like 60, 70 mile loop every day. And I was like, I don't need to go to school anymore. This is dumb.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You have an advantage in that too, in that you're seeing what the real world of that job looks like while you're learning about it, and there was probably a delta there between what you were learning and what you were actually doing.
Totally, and the fact that the other advantage I had was just very early on in that world. So that company was a retail company. So we had like 17 stores in Southern California, and one of the guys that they hired to build the e-commerce website. At the time, these retail guys that ran the company were just like, sure, go ahead, start this other online thing. So as like a 21-year-old, the guy who was running it recognized that I had, some skills that he could take advantage of or whatever. And so we had very little oversight, very little, management at all. And they were just saying like, oh, cool, there's this website that brings in money and you guys got it figured out. We're doing all this stuff.
Keep going.
Yeah, totally. So I had a crazy advantage of just being super young and being able to run, a multi-million-dollar website and millions of dollars worth of advertising budget with basically impossible to fail. So we just learned.
Did that job ruin you on jobs? When you have a job as a 19, 20, 21-year-old where you don't have a lot of oversight, you don't really have a boss breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
Would you even have a tolerance to going back and taking another job where those things are not the case?
Well, when I say I didn't really have a ton of oversight, I mean I didn't have someone who understood digital marketing or e-commerce at all, except for my immediate boss. And because I didn't have someone who said like, here's how you have to do it, that was really fun because we got to play and figure things out. But at the same time, because the company was pretty much coming from a retail, physical, brick and mortar location kind of mindset, it was a little limiting on, I was finding myself in like a meeting with a lot older people, a lot more experienced people, and I would be saying things and it was just like, what? So that was frustrating in its own way because I was trying to get these ideas across the board or trying to get more attention onto the things that we were working on that we believed could be bigger, but without the understanding from the other side, that was
hard to get
tricky.
Buy-in.
Yeah, that was tricky. And then the other thing was I wasn't getting paid shit. I was getting paid like we were just talking about with him. I was the bus driver. So I was just this kid who started in retail, who sold shoes to skateboarders. So they never saw me as a professional because they never saw the the opportunity as a professional career because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. So there was a little bit of like respect issue there and a little bit of pay issue there that to me was just like, okay, all of the things that you would have issues with that you just said, like being an employee to go back to or whatever, it was just in a different category.
Yeah.
Where I was kind of always chomping at the bit of like if they would just let me do the thing that I want to do, then we could do it. And then I finally got that at Onnit.
Right. Yeah, that was sort of the open book with gasoline behind it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, because it was a similar situation where it was like, okay, Mike, you know how to do your thing.
Yeah.
But it had a paycheck attached to it. It had a title attached to it.
Yeah.
And what I had told him from the beginning was like, if I'm going to do this, you have to let me do all the things I want to do.
Yeah.
And fortunately, he was down with that, and so I got to do the things.
I want to come back to that. I do want to talk about your tenure at Onnit because that's where we first met in the first place. But with respect to a formal education in your now professional discipline.
Yeah.
You have kids.
Yep.
How many kids do you have?
2.
2. What do you and your wife talk about as it relates to ongoing education beyond like high school with your kids? Is it important to you?
We've had a couple conversations recently, actually, because I was talking to another guy who's probably 10 years my senior, and so he's got a kid who's about to go to college. And so just off the cuff, we were talking about how he's touring, schools. And he was mentioning that Boston University is one of the options. And then he told me how expensive it was because they don't live in Boston or whatever. And, he's well-to-do. He had no problem, making the payment, but he was just like, can you believe how expensive this is? And I think it was like 80 or 90 grand or something like that for a year.
A year?
Yeah. And, I had that fresh in my mind, and then something came up at home where we were talking about college or something in front of my daughter who's 7, and she was like, oh yeah, when I go to college, blah, blah, blah. And then I started, talking to my wife about like, dude, I just heard about Boston University or whatever it was. And I was like, there is no chance I will say that you need to do this.
Yeah.
Because my particular path was like, I didn't finish, right? But I was working, so it was fine. And, furthermore, I think that a lot of people that I have worked with that do have the degree or various degrees, or like an MBA or whatever. I've worked with plenty of MBAs that are talented, smart, know what they're talking about. But I've also worked with a lot of MBAs that have like the MBA playbook that come into a corporate environment thinking that things go this way. And they get shell-shocked because business is messy. Like the real world of like e-commerce, entrepreneurism, business in general, it's not PowerPoint decks.
Yeah.
And it's not spreadsheets that say this is how this works.
It's not that case study you spent a semester on.
It really is, couldn't be further from that.
Yeah.
Right? And for all of the different companies I've either worked for or worked with over the years, every single one of them is different, and if you come in with a template and say like, here's how it's done, more often than not, you're pushed out of the room. Right. Like the only way that you can work with multiple companies, from what I, kind of discovered from my agency world, is, you've got your fundamentals, you've got your more or less kind of playbook of like the way that you need to do things. But then you have to take that thing and sort of shape it for the person that you're working with to adapt to their culture, to their business model, to their employees, to the way that they communicate, the way that they interact, the way that they meet, the way that they need data presented to them. Like, it's all very different and very unique. And so, all that to say, like, I think like the formal education system has a ton of merits and a lot of benefits to go through that whole thing. Absolutely. When you get into the 6-figure range for what it's going to cost to go to one of those schools, something like Harvard obviously puts you on a path of, okay, now you can get this caliber of job just because of that piece of paper. And I think that there's plenty of Ivy League schools that, sort of are on that level. However, I don't think I've hired someone in the last 6 years where I could even tell you where they went to college, if they even went to college, because it just matters so little to what I do.
Me either.
Yeah.
I never even see it on a resume anymore.
Yeah.
College education doesn't, well, and that's somewhat because of the nature of what we do.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've ever noted where somebody went to school, even if they ultimately, I find out that they went to the same school I did. That's always like an afterthought.
Like,
I think what college used to be was this like difficult thing to get through that showed, okay, this young person is capable of doing the job just because I know they're willing to put up with 4 years of really hard work.
Totally.
And I think the product has changed.
It has, and I think also culturally, I think we shifted from from a society of sort of makers, doers, and industry into a lot more like intellectual work. And I think a lot of that shift has, just generationally, you're trying to get your kids on a more prosperous path than you were before. So, you dug ditches, but my kid's not going to do that. He's going to go to school.
Yeah.
And so I think like over the last 50, 60 years or whatever, that culture has just become you have to go to college, right, to get the degree so that you can get the job. And because of that influx of demand to go to school and like that necessity, you have to go to school, there's no, coincidence that those prices have gone up considerably. And the fact that you can get a loan for any of, the value of what that is, including more than the value of that education. I think there's a glut for sure. Yeah. I think there's a glut of people that have college degrees that don't necessarily have a job that reflects those skill set that they learned, and probably don't have a pay structure that is equal to the piece of paper that they got. Mm-hmm. Some of them, for sure, and obviously you got to go to med school if you're going to be a doctor, right?
Yeah, some specialties require
engineering, some of the sciences, maths, and STEM stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, entrepreneurialism, sure, having an MBA is going to help. But at the end of the day, it's not.
There's no replacement for the experience that you get when you actually get into the real world.
Definitely
I have a degree in marketing, but I recognize, I do, BBA in business management and marketing. Mm-hmm. And I would say of the things I learned in school, I pretty quickly recognized, even in my senior internship, that the things that I was learning were dated.
Yeah.
That they were well beyond their useful life. And something like marketing changes so fast because the medium is always changing, that if you're not actually doing it, you're not staying up to date with whatever the trend is at the time.
Right.
Which that's all marketing is recognizing the trends, right?
Yeah, and that's for sure. And also on the tactical side of marketing, like when you're getting into the, Facebook advertising, Google advertising, or content marketing, some of the stuff like that, that changes so quickly and so rapidly. It's not something I'm terribly interested anymore in keeping up with, because now as I get older, it's I've been able to recognize some of the patterns that are universal regardless of the tactics. So I'm much more focused on the universally tried and true, proven stuff that matters over the last, millennia.
Yeah. The strategy level.
Strategy level, what matters most, how humans sort of react to stimuli, right? So offers, products, how stuff makes me feel, right? Because the tactics are going to change, like we just said, every day, every week, there's something new. There's, TikTok was the hot thing, and before that it was Instagram. Before that, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. It's just sort of repackaged, reapplied. The methodologies of how you're going to get those channels to work correctly have been true since the beginning of time.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's talk about the Onnit thing. So you were in California at the time, and Onnit had been founded.
Yeah, so I was here first.
You were in Austin first.
I was in Austin from 2009 to 2011, and Aubrey asked if I would help him start on it. And so I worked on designing the first website and wireframing it and writing copy around the products and kind of the overall flow of the company as sort of a side gig. And he was doing two companies at the same time. It was Onnit and then Alpha Nail, which was his male nail polish company.
Okay.
And so we were kind of working on both of those things at the same time, and I thought neither one of them were going to do shit. It was just yeah, sure, paycheck, cool.
Did you say Alpha Nail?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So Alpha Nail and Alpha Brain, very closely related in name. But yeah, so he started those two companies about the same time, and I helped him me and Josh and a few other people helped him design and build Onnit from scratch. And then I moved back to California, where I'm originally from, for another gig. You want me to just tell the...
Yeah, tell the progression.
So I was working in California, and we had a pretty sweet little apartment on the beach in Hermosa Beach. Not a great company situation I was working for. The company's fine, but I didn't belong there. It didn't feel good, whatever.
Were you married at the time?
Was living with my now wife.
Okay.
Yeah. So I met her here. She moved back with me to California, and then we were living there.
Gotcha.
And so between 2011, 2012, Aubrey had contacted me and said, hey, this, company's starting to take off on it. He was like, I would love for you to come back and, help me build this thing and run marketing. And my first reaction was just like, I'm good. I'm on the beach. Where I'm at professionally, not super fulfilling, but like my life is pretty good. And so kind of like politely, thanks, but no thanks. And then probably 6 months passed and he hit me up again and was like, yo, things are really starting to take off. And I would really, really like you to come back. And so then it was like, okay, well, I know Aubrey, I know a little bit about this company and all the things. And it was, 2012. So what Onnit was just getting going. And I was really kind of struggling with the decision. And so I talked to my cousin, who's a really good, clear thinking, business-minded person and, always helps me through tough decisions. And I was kind of weighing the pros and cons, and he's like, I'll give you some advice, which is really good advice that I've used several times since then. But he said, all right, you got a really tough decision. Move back to Austin, leave this behind, jump headfirst into something that's, new and very much a startup, not very much guarantee of success, but like there's, some hopes and kernels of something good happening there. He's like, so you got a really tough decision. He's like, the best thing you could do is make it an easy decision. So he said, write down what it would take to make it really easy. And I was like, that's fucking brilliant. Like,
What's the job look like if it's a hell yeah, I want that job?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and I sent it to Aubrey, and I was like, do these things, I'm there. And he said yes.
How long did it take him to respond?
Probably like an hour.
Really? So at that point, how many people were working for Onnit at that time?
So when I got there towards the end of 2012, they had a warehouse with probably 3 or 4 people working the warehouse. Aubrey, Eddie, Josh, Orlando, probably Blakely, probably like, I want to say like maybe at the most 10 people.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you were there for how long?
End of 2012 till end of 2017.
2012 to 2017.
Yeah, so 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And how much, I mean, obviously anybody that's followed the story of Onnit's trajectory knows what happened, during the course of those 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But describe how much the job changed from day one versus what it was like when you left.
So I would say I knew some stuff about business and I knew some stuff about marketing going into that job. And that 5-year period, looking back on it, was probably the equivalent of like 15 to 20 years of professional experience, just from the growth that we had in that short amount of time. Going from a relatively unknown supplement brand to a full-blown, lifestyle company that also sold supplements. And that, within a really, really short amount of time. When I started, we would struggle to make contacts and relationships with people. Would say like, hey, this is our company, this is what we do. Those phone calls where you're having to sell yourself or sell the company or talk about all of the things, right? And by the end of it, we had such a strong pipeline of people moving across the country, banging our door down to come work for us. Forget the customers, forget celebrities and influencers and, professional athletes that were showing up to come be a part of this thing that we had created. But when you would have people, literally people that would pack their car up, move across the country, show up at our door and just be like, I want a job. Whatever it takes. I don't care what the job is. I'm here. I love what you guys are doing. That was cool.
Yeah.
That was really cool to see because it reverberated so far beyond a company. It became this magnet for people that really wanted to make big improvements in their lives.
Talk about getting off that ride. When did you know it was time to leave?
So I would say somewhere in 2016, it was pretty apparent that what I wanted to do with the company and what Aubrey wanted to do with the company were pretty much at odds. I probably got, a little too big for my britches in terms of like what I thought my influence on the company was and where I fit into things versus, where he did, looking back on it. I really felt, because I did have a piece of the company, but I really felt like it was mine. Not delusional to the sense where like I ran the show or anything like that, but it really felt personal to me. And so, every waking moment was like dedicated to what we were doing. Wake up in the morning thinking about how to make things better, go to bed at night thinking about how to make things better. And then Aubrey and I had this moment where it was, it was building. And then it just kind of became very clear to me in a meeting that it was like, oh, you dumb shit. This is not your company. Which is like so obvious, looking back on it.
In hindsight.
In hindsight, yeah. But it was like, oh yeah. Why am I doing all of this? Why am I pouring all of my, sense of self-worth and self-importance and like well-being into this thing that's somebody else's? And we just wanted different things for the brand. And obviously he's the owner of the company, he's the CEO. Like, even thinking that I should have any type of, dominion over any of that is silly, right? Like, the best I could hope for is to, move things towards my direction or whatever. But it just became very clear that it was like, oh, yeah, obviously this is not yours.
Yeah.
He wants it this way. You want it this way. The only way that you're going to get your way is to get rid of the, CEO, founder, guy who runs the company. So that's not going to work. So, it became pretty clear.
Yeah. So then Heart of the Sun is next.
Yep.
When you get to a point where you realize, like, okay, this door is closing, now this is my next thing to do.
Yeah.
Talk about that transition from one to the next. Do you remember the first day of like full-time Heart of the Sun? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So when I had that moment where I realized that this wasn't my thing, and I realized that, oh, this can all go away like that. And I've been putting so much equity and all of this into this thing that's not mine. It was very clear to me at that moment. It was like, oh, the only way I should be doing this is if it's yours. Giving this much of yourself to someone else's thing now sounds silly. So to me, it was like, okay, I need to fortify myself in some sort of thing to provide for myself, to remove the opportunity for someone else to, pull the strings.
Was it because you had always wanted to do that, or was it like a box unchecked that now I need to prove to myself that I can do it for myself and not for somebody else?
No, what it started was genuinely from the point of view of, I don't know if I can put this much effort into someone else's thing. And so it was like, I think I know what I'm capable of if I can tap into that level of like buy-in, and I don't know if I can do that unless it's mine. So, I felt naked immediately because it was like, oh, this could go away tomorrow, and then what? So it was a little bit of like a defensive move to say like, all right, well, I can see the path is ending here, whether it's tomorrow or in a year from now or whatever. And this is 2016. So I had a couple of people that over the years had reached out and just said like, hey, would you ever consider helping me with, a project on the side or whatever? And so I knew there was like opportunity there. So I made a couple phone calls and was just like, hey, if you're thinking about doing something, let me know. And so that was, mid to late-ish 2016. And within 6 months or so, I had 2 clients, and so it was like, I was literally running marketing, CMO, creative at Onnit, and then would leave, at the end of the day and start doing work for a side project. And within those 6 months or so, it became pretty clear to me. It was like, okay, I think I can make this work. So, yeah, I just kept building it sort of on the side, nights and weekends, and talked to a buddy of mine that had run an agency or worked at an agency before, and I was like, hey, I think we could do this, but I don't really know how to do any of the, business side of what an agency looks like or how to, talk like this or whatever. And so we partnered up, formed an LLC while I was still there at Onnit, and then when the time finally came in 2017 where Aubrey pulled the plug, it was like, cool, I got a meeting in 20 minutes that I got to be at for a client.
Yeah.
So it was like, completely clean break, like went from one gig to the next with literally zero.
You already had your hand on this vine.
I was already there.
So when you let go of this vine, you already knew where you
When
were
I tell
going.
you, I literally left the conversation where Aubrey let me go and went to a client meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long did the HOTS era last for you?
So, so the one sort of overlapping year while I was at Onnit, 2016, till whenever I got let go in 2017, full time, right? Mm-hmm. So from 2016 through 2022 when I sold it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the course of that transition year, our paths crossed.
Mm-hmm.
And we had just known each other professionally through the Onnit relationship.
Yep.
And then when you got to Heart of the Sun, I reached out to you to tell you congratulations because I know how hard it is to start something on your own.
Yeah, you came and visited the office.
Yeah, the office over there on the east side. And then at the end of 22, when the company changes hands, now you've got basically two transactions that happened right at the same time, right?
Yep.
Because the Unilever
21 and then 22.
Yeah, it happened right back to back. When you look back at those two eras of your professional life, the Onnit era, the Heart of the Sun era, is there one that stands above the other in terms of the gratification you get from it? Which one are you more proud of?
I'm probably more proud of Heart of the Sun because it, it was built from zero by me and a buddy of mine, and I don't know. I mean, they're two different worlds because I'm super proud of what we did at Onnit, but right? Like it was a really big team by the end of it, doing really big things, but it was also Aubrey's, baby that we sort of like helped nurture. So I'm very proud of what we did there, and obviously had much more impactful results, not only from the size of the sale of the company, but the people we were working with, the impact we were making in the world, versus my local kind of agency thing that I made.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of the pride that comes from the Heart of Sun thing was because it was mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it more challenging for you to leave work at work when it was the Heart of the Sun era?
It was impossible.
Yeah.
There is no, at least we used to have this conversation all the time about the work-life balance thing, and when it's your own thing, I don't know if it ever stops. It's very difficult to just say like, oh no, work's over, because it was one of the hardest things in the beginning of that company was when I first started it. I would be working 12 hours a day trying to just get it going. Mm-hmm. And, if you make a list in your first month of existence of all the things you got to get done, the list doesn't stop. Mm-hmm. There's literally not a part where you go, okay, once I get to this, I'm done. Yeah. And so I had like a realization early on probably my, second or third month on the new gig, where it was like, oh, okay, you have to literally stop every day and say I'm done, because there is no end.
Right.
If you just keep saying like, I'll just keep doing things on the list doesn't stop.
And so, things hit the list faster than you check them off.
Totally. Yeah. And every time you check something off, it branches into a new thing. Right. Well, now that that's done, I can work on this. That was tough. So that was ultimately the biggest reason why I wanted to sell the company, was because I realized that I had built a very difficult job.
Would you ever do it again?
Not in the same way.
How would you do it differently?
I think there's a path of doing sort of what I sold was a lot of like me, right? So when I would meet somebody that was a business owner that needed help with marketing, I felt like a lot of the things that they were buying was the conversation that we were having about what I could help with and what we could do and what the strategy was and all of that.
Your vision.
Yeah, mostly. I think so.
Yeah.
And then when we'd get into the delivery, I would lead a lot of that strategy and sort of oversee it, and then have a team of people delivering various parts of it. So whether it was web design or logo design or advertising management or coming up with campaigns or whatever, I had, a team of people that would deliver the results. And I think the biggest flaw with that business model, the agency business model, is that the more business you get in that model that I had, the more man hours and people that you had to absorb to fulfill that. So, you'd have this moment of like, oh, we got a new client, we got a new contract, we got this new revenue coming in, but we're too busy for it. So then there's like this moment of high and then this moment of like, shit, okay, now I got to hire somebody again. So as the money would come in, the money would go out just as fast to keep up with that demand. And so I think like the way I would try to do it this time would be less clients, less deliverables in terms of like creative and all of that stuff, more thought and just selling the thought, selling the strategies, selling the ideas, selling the guidance that I can deliver personally without having the overhead on the other side. Because ultimately, being the person that was responsible for making the business development side of it work, getting new clients, also being responsible for hiring employees, delivering the strategy, delivering the results, running the meeting, paying the bills, figuring out who's going to put the carpet in, like all of the things while still delivering the core business was starting to drive me nuts.
And that's totally upstream of the challenge of then turning it off at the end of the day and being dad and husband.
Man.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. Like if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't do it differently at all. But if I had to do it over again, or when Live Oak is no longer my thing, what would be the next thing that I would do? And I think it would largely be timed around when my kids don't need me as much.
Yeah.
Because of the mental toll, it's intermittently a toll, right? There's a lot of times where the upside justifies the downside.
Sure.
But it's just the amount of mental bandwidth that has to go into keeping the thing going.
Yeah.
That's totally at the expense of what you have at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
There's also the balance between keeping something going and growing something.
Right.
Because I think you can get to a point, and I think you're largely at this point, where you've got a really talented group of people that you can trust to run a big portion of the business. I didn't get to that point yet, or when I was in it. And I kind of saw how long that was going to take and what that would require to do. And ultimately, I kind of said, like, I don't think I want to do that. I don't think I want to put in another 10 years to get to that level.
Yeah.
Because I think for the agencies out there that are very successful and sort of have their system and have a ton of profitable revenue coming in, and they've got good margins and all that, I think ultimately the difference is between like a small one and some of these big guys is you get 2 or 3 whales of clients that pay all your bills, right? Pay well beyond all your bills because they have giant budgets. And there's plenty of money for your people. There's plenty of money for you. There's plenty of money to keep the lights on, for a year, 2 years, whatever it was. I didn't even get close to that, and we're talking about like, clients like Southwest Airlines or Capital One or something like that, where you're doing multi-million-dollar contracts.
Yeah. And you're one of several agencies they work with.
Yeah.
Different projects.
Yeah, and it's always true, like the problem clients are the smaller ones, the needier ones, whatever. And I think that is true when you're talking about, I'm sure you would agree with this with your client base, but when you get into the bigger guys, they're sweating you a lot less. They're not over your shoulder every day. When you're dealing with the small business owner operators, when they write you that check, there's still some level of like, this is my money.
Yeah.
I'm giving it to you. here's $100, turn it into $200,
Right.
right? When you're dealing with bigger corporate organizations, there's a budget, there's a committee, there's a board, there's so much, there's so many layers between the person you're working with and where that money came from that there's just a lot more trust, there's a lot more openness, there's a lot more kind of ability to operate.
Yeah. There's less emotion that goes into those relationships.
Much less emotion.
Into them making decisions.
Yeah.
Which is a double-edged sword. It can be a double-edged sword because then there's also not necessarily the recognition of the job that you're doing when the emotion's not in it, when there's not heart in making that decision, or they don't get the good vibes from us as the vendor. Well, then they're not going to be as likely to recognize the things that we're doing a good job of that they may not have gotten had they gone elsewhere. So there's a give and take there, but yeah, it's a pretty unique perspective that you have, having had both the in-house CMO type role and the agency type role, and being able to juxtapose those against each other.
And then back to the CMO role.
So talk about that. Still Austin enters the picture when?
Yeah. 2020, running the agency, and things were going really well. And COVID hit, and we were trying to, figure out up from down what was going to happen. Lost a couple of clients like immediately, really kind of stressing on what the future was going to be, and no one really knew. And Still Austin, local whiskey business here, 2020 was the year that they were finally going to launch their flagship bourbon. And so from a spirits company perspective, the way that the playbook at least, to usually launch a brand or launch a product like that is a lot of in-person, right? So a lot of tastings in stores, tastings in restaurants, bars, lots of one-to-one interaction with people. And obviously, once the window kind of closed on that, Still Austin's plans changed pretty quickly because they, had a lot of capital, they had a lot of plans, they had a lot of people, they had a lot of booze ready to hit the shelves, and now they had no playbook, essentially. So through colleagues, maybe even Josh, they kind of caught wind that my agency did really good work on the digital side. And so, I got introduced to them to help them launch the brand online.
This is during the HOTS era. So
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So 2020, I'm still running the agency. So I took them on as a client, pretty small contract, just to get the word out on social media that this new company had launched. And at the time, you could go into liquor stores to buy it. But really what the strategy was kind of the Drizzly thing, which was really getting popular.
What's that?
Drizzly was they just went out of business. But at the time, blowing up because everybody was at home, stuck at home. And so Drizzly was like door-to-door liquor delivery.
Oh, okay.
So
essential business during a pandemic.
Totally, right? You got to get your booze fixed somehow.
Right.
So we applied everything that we knew in digital marketing to a spirits brand, which not a lot of spirits brands were doing. And so we kind of successfully did a lot of work for those first 6, 7, 8 months of the brand, and kind of launched it in Austin and got some good success. And so I really liked the people at Still Austin. I liked the brand. I liked what they were doing and saying. And most importantly, I liked the whiskey. It was really good.
Because you were a whiskey drinker before then.
I was, yeah. I was really worried when I took the contract on, because there was no in-person, so there was no way for me to meet these people or let alone taste the whiskey in the beginning. But thankfully, when I had it for the first time, it was oh, good.
You were worried the product was going to suck.
Well, yeah, I was probably convinced that it wasn't going to be great.
Oh,
but
okay.
Not only was it good, it's the best whiskey, I think, at that price point, period. So we have a great product, great people, great brand. So I kind of found myself in more meetings and more discussions and being trusted more and more by senior leadership over there. And so our little contract got a little bigger, and then it got a little bigger, and then we took on more and more, and then pretty soon we were doing everything. And so, my agency was running the website, all of digital marketing, all of advertising, social media, strategy. I was writing their budgets for them, for the year. I was in board meetings, and they became my biggest client. And we were doing really good work for them, and they really liked me, and I really liked them. And so as they kind of became the only client I was spending the majority of my time on, besides business development and stuff like that. And so I was spending a huge amount of time at Still Austin to keep that business going for us at Heart of the Sun. And just kept going from 2020 to 22. And then we got kind of to a boiling point at Heart of the Sun where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so Brandon, their COO at the time, said like, hey, if you ever wanted to, come on full time as a CMO, we'd love to have you. And then serendipitously, I got an outreach email from a brokerage company that buys and sells agencies. And they said, hey, if you're interested, there's a lot of demand out there for companies that want to buy agencies. And, you get spam emails and stuff like that all the time. But at that moment in my life, it was like, let's see where this goes. And so, yeah, it was legit. The company's called Barney. They were fantastic to work with. And within, I think, like 30 days, we were being courted by several different agencies out there that were interested in buying us. And then within probably 60 days, we were under contract. And then the whole thing closed in probably 5 months from start to finish.
Another successful hand on this vine before this one happens. Yeah.
And so I had told Still Austin, it was like, hey, if that offer's out there, I'm kind of in the middle of this thing. So I think I can make this transition, come on full time, get rid of Heart of the Sun, but they'll still be there as like the agency. I could just manage them. And so, I mean, many, many, many perfectly aligned cogs in a pretty big machine that all just kind of went perfectly.
Yeah, what do you make of that in hindsight? Like, we don't have to go deep down this rabbit hole because we don't have time for it, but given your faith background, did you at the time, did you pray about it? Were you asking for guidance, or was it just like obvious this is the path, that's what I'm supposed to do?
It was not obvious. In fact, I would talk to our mutual friend Madison all the time about the whole, day-to-day for everything for Heart of the Sun, because we were kind of going through the same things. And
very similar paths.
Yeah. And when I was like telling him about this opportunity, he was very much like, there's no chance in hell this is going to work. He's like, yeah, you get a lot of people that are sniffing around, but acquisitions are really difficult. He was really tempering expectations, because to me that whole time I was thinking to myself, I don't know how this is going to work. This has to go right, and then if still wants me, and blah 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 blah. We're talking about a lot of moving pieces, right? And not just from making the deal make sense, or even hopping over to that company to make sense, but I got 15 clients, I got 15 employees. They all have to buy into this thing. They all have to believe that this is the right thing for the deal to even go through, right? If any of those clients left, in the middle of that process, that changes the deal structure. If any of the employees leave in that process, that changes the deal structure. So there's just, 1,000 balls in the air. And anyone that I was talking to, not just Madison, was like, yeah, good luck with that, right? So, from a faith perspective, I didn't look at it as like, yes, this is the path. I looked at it as like, well, this is what I'm doing over here at Heart of the Sun. And here's an opportunity that if, a grand slam can happen, this would be great. And so, I mean, I prayed on it in terms of like, help me get through this. One way or the other. But it wasn't like, please help this go through.
You weren't praying for a specific result.
No, it was just because all of those stresses that were happening at the same time, very difficult at home, at the same time, because we're having these conversations of like, look, I can't do this right now. I'm going to be kind of a little less of a good husband, partner, and father for a minute because of this. But if this goes through, things are going to be a lot better. You know, so a lot of like, let's have faith in each other conversations. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what the odds of that thing working out would have been, or even, you know, timing wise. Another friend of mine, agency guy, is like, you really nailed it in terms of timing, because, you know, coming out of COVID, there was a lot of cash floating around, a lot of acquisitions happening, and you know, valuations that aren't necessarily happening anymore, and service businesses, and what that looks like in terms of M&A right now. And I don't know. Yeah, I got lucky. Good preparation.
Threaded the needle.
Yeah, threaded the needle.
Yeah, that's great.
That's kind of how it happened.
Okay, so let's shift a little bit into personal life stuff.
Sure.
With your wife, you have lots of business interests going at once. You'll have a lot of plates spinning at any given time, right? How much are y'all talking about what's going on in your life professionally, what's going on in her life professionally? Do you purposefully try to distance from that? How do y'all make it work in your relationship where you can discuss the things that are going on with you professionally in a productive way, or is it just moratorium on any professional talk?
No, it's we have quite a bit of professional talk. So she runs one of our businesses, the photo booth rental company. She also runs our 2 Airbnbs. There's no way around it, right? Like I'm at my office 8 hours a day, and she's in her office, which is home, or at her photo booth company. So when we get home at the end of the day, you know, it's war stories, right? And then also because we have, you know, interest in these businesses together, there's no way around it, you know? So in a lot of ways, there's no difference between personal and business for us.
It's just all intertwined.
It's just all intertwined.
Is there a point at which you have to go, okay, no talking about Still Austin, no talking about Airbnb, no talking about Mirror. Now let's just talk about each other.
Yeah, then it gets quiet.
Be present. Yeah, you have nothing to talk about.
No, if that happens, it's because one of us is just at our breaking point for whatever we had going on that day. And so if I need some advice from her, or I want to unload whatever my day's issues were, or vice versa, we're pretty good at picking up on, hey, I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But also, like, you know, I think it's been beneficial for our relationship. Because I think some of the years at Onnit, the problems and the issues that I was going through are so foreign to somebody that's not an entrepreneur or doing some sort of day-to-day business like that. So once she started doing that stuff, we actually probably got a lot closer because we could commiserate.
You had some mutual footing at that point.
For sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. Talk about the significance of a campfire. Do you think we were going to talk about this?
I did not. Why don't you tee it up?
I'll tee it up.
Yeah.
It's end of March, early April 2020.
Yep.
And
about the same timeline as Still Austin.
Correct. Maybe even a little bit before Still Austin. This is HOTS era. This is early pandemic, early lockdowns. I think it was about a month into lockdowns. And you and I are having a conversation about, I guess, commiserating about what it's like not seeing people face to face. And we had a conversation about what would be a relatively risk-free way to be around each other, because I think I know some guys that might appreciate that. And we had a campfire.
Yep.
But I want to know from you, I won't speak for you, I'll speak for me. To this day, when I sit around a campfire, or even a candle, like any fire, I have a fondness for it that I would not have developed had it not been for those 2 years.
Yep.
Talk about what that meant in your life for where you were at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you remember, there was probably a 6-month or 1 year even long period where every person we met, we would weave the campfire into the conversation. And it was almost like we had found a new religion, right? Yeah, I mean, it was just getting to the boiling point of people being being stuck at home. And, when you said, hey, Madison, and I said, yeah, I met him before, and you said, Josh, and I said, yeah. He said, we should all get together, we should talk. And I was like, okay, cool, let's do it. And we went over to your house, and you had a cool backyard where you set your campfire, and we just sat around and talked shit, like human beings used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, a lot of the circumstances of just being locked down and being able to get out was great. A lot of the circumstances of just like-minded people doing similar things and getting together in that environment was great, because even being able to share your feelings of what this whole lockdown situation was difficult to do with people that weren't within your four walls. But then also having like-minded people doing entrepreneurial things, struggling with business ideas or whatever was going on, it felt so like therapeutic, I would say, just to get the social and the business and then the personal side that would just automatically come out towards the end of the night.
Mm-hmm.
Getting all of that together, it was awesome, right? I mean, we had so many conversations about how do we bottle this up and spread this out through the world, and how do we get people to do campfires? And we had so many times where I got a guy we should bring, and you got a guy you should bring, and we should all meet together. And yeah, man, it was therapeutic. Yeah, for a very weird time where nobody knew what was going on.
I think at the time we recognized, just because it was something we were so fond of, we recognized the importance of it.
Yeah.
I think the further removed I am from 2020, the more I recognize how I probably would have gone on tilt emotionally.
Like so many people did.
I would have been much more likely to have gone on tilt had I not had that support system.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it now is that I look at the people that were involved in that group. There were 5 of us that were there consistently. There's a lot we disagree on.
Mm-hmm.
Yet every Thursday for the better part of 2 years, we sat around a campfire with each other, and the things that we disagreed on were footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we didn't talk about them.
And I would say a lot of the things that people disagreed on ended up getting closer on.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. What lessons are there to be learned from? I'm wanting you to go deep, be real. Teach me something here, Mike. What lessons are there to be learned from that you feel like apply to where we're at today? It's a pretty tumultuous time right now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's almost cliche at this point to say people have more in common than they think, right? The differences between your ideology and my ideology, whether it's political or religious or whatever, are trivial in comparison to how much commonality we have. Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up. The way that we would get together and have disagreements and then maybe alter perception a little bit or alter your ideology a little bit or find common ground on certain things. Yeah, I think it all contributed to what made those sessions so cool.
Yeah.
One of the best parts was when you said, I remember when you said we should do this, the very first phone call that we had to talk about it. You're like, I have one condition. I was like, okay, what's that? You're like, I'm a big hugger.
Yeah, that checks out. That sounds like me.
But it was, it's so dumb, but it was like, it was so meaningful because we didn't have any type of interaction like that with people. Like it's hard to remember how dumb it was or how crazy it was. Like you would walk past your neighbor from as far away as you possibly could. If the people didn't live inside your 4 walls, you wouldn't dream of shaking their hands, And that was only like a month or 2 in when we got together, and it was like, don't tell your wives, that we hugged it out.
Yeah, that's about right. There's something to that though, man. Like going heart to heart with somebody in a hug.
Yeah.
I don't think we really fully understand the value to that.
Yeah.
To our biology even.
Yeah.
When you don't have it, you recognize that it's lacking in your life. At least I did.
Well, I think you did. I think I didn't, and quickly realized, how our rebellious get-togethers.
Yeah.
Because at the time you just weren't supposed to be around other people.
Right.
How valuable it was.
Yeah.
And then how silly it became.
I think what it taught me was we spent the requisite time with each other to have developed a pretty high level of trust, both in professional interactions with each other, but also discussing some pretty gnarly topics that you wouldn't necessarily talk about over coffee with a casual friend.
It's the magic of the fire.
Yeah, it was the non-disclosure that we had in the campfire context. But when you get to the point where you have that requisite trust in somebody, it's really beneficial to have friendships with people like that you're nothing like, or that you share some things in common with, things that are important, the importance of family, the importance of integrity, hard work, all those things. But then also to align yourself with people that you're nothing like.
Right.
That you have political differences with, that you have some religious differences with. But also to understand, this goes back to what we talked about prior to recording, I've got blind spots.
Yeah.
Like there's things that I'm definitely not doing well. And if I don't have a stable of people that I know are comfortable disagreeing with me and telling me, no, I think you're wrong about that, I'm very, very likely to have created an echo chamber where I'm never going to know those things.
Yeah, well, and also given the time and the circumstances of being on lockdown and having so much seclusion, how much worse an echo chamber can be. Because I think that was probably the catalyst for even doing it in the first place, was I was talking to you on the phone. We were potentially going to work together. You were going to hire me to help, do some marketing. And then those conversations evolved into gripes about my situation with employees and all of that stuff. And then it just became, oh, we should get together and talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
I remember being almost in tears at the time for the frustration of not being around people.
Yeah.
Because
that's you.
That's my wiring.
Yeah.
I got to get my hands on you at some point and see somebody face to face.
Yeah. Big hugger.
So to call that therapeutic is an understatement for sure. So we're here in September of 24.
Yep.
We've got an election coming up in a couple of weeks. And anything I'm not going to ask you a political question. Stop, pump the brakes.
Where's the fire?
Don't quit. Any news outlet, any social media site, any Reddit thread you find yourself in, it's virtually impossible to escape negativity. What makes you optimistic?
Optimistic?
Yeah.
On generally speaking in life?
You must think a lot about the future given that you have kids. Mm-hmm. What makes you optimistic about the future that your kids are going to inherit? What evidence do you have to be optimistic about the future?
Well, I'm not, I would say, immediately optimistic. I wouldn't say that I've got blinders on to the fact that everything's going to be fine tomorrow. I'm pretty realistic to the sense that things are pretty bad in a lot of different ways. And can get a lot worse pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we're probably going to get a lot worse before we get better.
In what way?
I don't know. It feels like there is not a moment of let's put this behind us coming up anytime soon. I feel like, I'm not alarmist to say we've got a civil war coming or anything like that. But I do think there's a lot of work to be done before things will get palpably a lot better in terms of relations with people in our society, our country, and probably globally.
Yeah. What will it take to have that let's put this behind us era?
I think we have to, they'll call it a rock bottom. I think we have to get to a part that's universally this is as far as we're willing to go with this. And I don't know what that is in the immediate future. I think a lot of, the rhetoric around politics right now, and the future of democracy at stake, and all of that stuff.
From both sides.
From both sides, always, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just been ramped up over the last few election cycles.
Yeah.
Whenever we're in one of these election years, since 2015, 2016, my brain just starts, when we get to this level, my brain just gets to the part where it's like, let's get this over with. Whatever this, ramped up thing is, I just can't wait for the day after.
Yeah.
When everyone just goes back to work. Because I think one of the reasons why we get so ramped up is because that information's flying at us so rapidly and from so many different directions at the same time, that I think people get really sucked into or seduced by the idea that this is the most important thing. It's the most important election ever. This one's different. The future of, all of that ramped up, especially from a marketing standpoint. I get it. It sells ads.
Full circle.
Yeah, dude. So I'm extremely cynical from that standpoint because I know what's going on. I know everyone's getting rich, right?
Yeah.
And so I can't wait until that part of this just dials back, right? Like, I mean, something as dumb as like, hey, look, Jon Stewart, they took out of the, mothballs and now he's on TV again. Like, that's how profitable this is right now. That dude came out of retirement, even for one day a week. And I love him. I think it's great. But everybody's getting rich. And it's on the back of creating a lot of fear, a lot of worry, and whatever. And I think the optimism comes from, I think, just as humans, we're good at like adapting, evolving, surviving, and I think that in the long run, we'll get through everything and probably be in a better place. And if you really want to get objective about it, by most measurable metrics of like what is good and what is bad and how things are going, things are pretty good.
Any measurable, any objective metric.
Things are pretty good.
Yeah.
But just like how marketing operates, it's all based on emotion, right? And so I feel like things are worse than they've ever been. I feel like crime is higher than it's ever been. I feel all of these things, even though they're not true.
Yeah.
So, I would hope that eventually some of these tactics that are currently being deployed and currently like ramping up everyone's meters for fear and hysteria.
Threat.
I would hope that these tactics become a little passé, and I hope that people get a little more hip to this stuff as we're kind of passing through the fire at the moment, to where the alarmism isn't quite as high moving forward. It gets a little less profitable, and people get a little more grounded.
Can I tell you what makes me optimistic?
Sure, please.
Without over-romanticizing our friendship, I'm optimistic about the future because people like you exist. And not to put too much pressure on you, but you're the type of person that has overcome his own fear for putting himself out there in the public sphere. Like, you've released a handful of YouTube videos that have done really well, just talking about the nature of what you do for a living, right?
Yep.
The things that you're good at, marketing. And I think that people like you who have a character that I know from having spent hundreds of hours with you, who also can articulate in a way that people who don't know your discipline as well will understand that there's a business model here.
Yeah.
And that the reason that things feel so ramped up and they feel so crazy, and the reason you're so fucking pissed off right now about everything, is because you've been marketed to really, really elegantly.
Masterfully.
Yeah. That's what makes me optimistic, is that there's people that understand the grift, that have done the thing for a living that's being done now at scale to an entire globe of people, because this is not just, the U.S. election cycle is not a U.S. News cycle. That's global. If we have a way through it, it will start with an understanding of what has happened and why we're here in the first place. And I think that without people like you who are willing to stand up and say, well, wait a minute, I know what's going on. I've done this before. I think we would be doomed. But I'm optimistic because you're brave enough to stick your head up above the fray and say, hey, wait a minute, people, time out for a second. Look at what's happening to you.
I think I've made one video that was a little like that. That was, saying, here's what's actually, happening.
You should make another.
Yeah, I've had a lot. Well, I've had a few people say like, oh, this is your path, right? But it wasn't my favorite video, because it's kind of rooted in like cynicism. And I've said it for a few years now, but like, one of the reasons why I feel like I'm really, really cynical is because, I've sort of seen behind the curtain on how this stuff works. When you have these conversations at a really, really micro level for whatever brand or business or whatever, when you're talking about a tactic to get somebody to click on something, it's not too hard to extrapolate that to go broader into the macro level to see, some cat video that's getting 5 million views because of one of these little tricks or whatever. Well, it's the same shit, it's bigger stakes, right?
Yeah.
But it's hitting the same emotions, it's getting the same outcome, which is just eyeballs, clicks.
But it registers as cynicism to you because you know what's behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Whereas the vast majority of people, to use a Mark Twain quote, it's easier to fool a man than it is to convince a man that he's been fooled. The optimism would be for somebody that understands what's going on behind the curtain, who would be cynical about our chance of pulling out of it, right? To then at least do his best to put out into the world what's actually going on and give it a chance to happen, to give it a chance for people to see it and go, huh,
Yeah.
that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you with my own experience, prior to hundreds of hours around a campfire with marketers, I wouldn't have thought about things that way. I would have just assumed that my lens of looking at the world was the way that everybody was looking at the world.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic because you exist. No pressure.
I'll take it. I appreciate it, I guess. Yeah, it's funny because like Madison's another marketer, right? And so we talk about this stuff on a way, way, way deeper level, but sort of never talk about some of the stuff that you're talking about. Because to us, it's just such a no shit.
It's obvious. It's what you've been doing for decades.
Like we don't even have to say, I know what the Republicans are doing, or I get it. CNN's. We don't even have to say that because it's a given.
Yeah.
So when I make a video like that, and he's like, well, yeah, obviously this is true. And I'm like, yeah, but it's weird because like Tanner and my other friend Novak and all these other guys are like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's like, oh shit, all right. Maybe we should zoom out a little bit and kind of talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah. When I explained the business of social media to my 92-year-old grandpa, it was like he had no idea that that's what was going on.
Yeah.
And the moment you explain the business model, everything else
Makes sense.
makes sense.
Right.
Once you understand that one little thing, it's the
Yeah.
one domino that makes everything else understandable, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I guess that part's noble if you can figure out how to wake people up to it.
Well, you have to, because you've got me as a friend who will just constantly prod you until you do it.
Okay.
Mike, I said it before, but I'll repeat it, man. I appreciate you being willing to come in here and talk in public to tens of people that will watch this. But I love you, man. I love that you're in my life.
Love you too, man. Thanks for having me. I'm, we've been trying to do this forever. I'm glad we finally were able to figure it out.
Would love to do it again.
Yeah, dude. I'll do this anytime you want.
Great. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Should we hug it out?
Let's hug it. Appreciate you, buddy.